In Stalin's empire, loyalty wasn't rewarded. It was tested until it broke. This is the story of Alexei Rykov, the premier who dared to disagree. Before Stalin became the supreme ruler, before the gulags, before the terror, there was a country trying to rebuild itself from chaos. And among the men shaping its future stood Alexei Ivanovich Rykov, a quiet revolutionary, a man who believed more in systems than slogans. He wasn't a soldier like Trotsky, nor a manipulator like Stalin. He was an organizer, a builder, the man who kept the machine running, while others chased glory. Rykov had been with the Bolsheviks since 1898, jailed, exiled, but never broken. When the October Revolution struck in 1917, he became one of Lenin's trusted administrators, helping to manage the economy and industry. During the blood-soaked civil war that followed, he wasn't loud, he wasn't feared, but he was respected. A man whose word still meant something. According to historian Sheila Fitzpatrick, Lenin saw in Rykov a calm competence, someone who could govern, not just agitate. When the new Soviet government began to form, Rykov was everywhere, chairing committees, balancing shortages, keeping a starving nation alive. He believed in collective leadership, a shared vision of socialism. But Stalin believed in only one kind of leadership, his own. In 1922, Lenin suffered a stroke. The power vacuum began to form. The Bolsheviks looked for stability, someone steady to lead when Lenin was gone. Rykov was one of those who turned to Stalin, then a quiet, seemingly loyal bureaucrat. He saw Stalin as practical, reliable, a man who followed orders. But Rykov didn't realize that behind the paperwork, Stalin was already building an empire of obedience. By the time Lenin died in 1924, Stalin had the keys to the party, and Rykov had no idea that he'd just helped hand them over. He was an engineer of the revolution, but he didn't see the machine he helped build was already devouring its creators. 1924, Lenin was gone. The revolution had lost its voice, but the machine he built, the party, kept moving. At the top stood two men. One, Joseph Stalin, the general secretary, a man who controlled who entered the party, who stayed, and who vanished. The other, Alexei Rykov, the new premier of the Soviet Union, a man responsible for keeping the nation alive. Together, they ruled. On paper, Rykov believed the country could recover through patience. Factories rebuilt slowly. Farmers allowed to sell a portion of their grain. A small taste of freedom after years of blood and war. It was called the New Economic Policy, Lenin's last compromise with reality. And Rykov kept it alive. He wanted progress without terror, growth without starvation. But Stalin saw patience as weakness. According to historian Robert Conquest, Stalin believed mercy was counter-revolutionary, that fear, not trust, built obedience. Stalin's vision was brutal: forced collectivization, industrial quotas, control by decree. Rykov argued against it. He warned that pushing peasants too hard would lead to chaos and famine. He was right, but rightness no longer mattered. At meetings of the Politburo, Stalin began to test him. mocking him, interrupting him, turning every disagreement into disloyalty. When Rykov hesitated to approve a new policy, Stalin smiled coldly and said, "Comrade Rykov, perhaps you've forgotten. We are building socialism, not asking permission for it." Laughter filled the room. Rykov sat in silence. He knew what that laughter meant. By 1930, Stalin no longer needed the illusion of shared power. Rykov was removed as premier. His name was replaced in the newspapers by Stalin's loyalist, Vyacheslav Molotov. No official reason, just a quiet note from the Central Committee. He wasn't imprisoned, not yet. He was simply forgotten. The revolution he helped build was now ruled by one man, and the premier of the Soviet Union had become a ghost inside his own creation. After losing his position as premier, Alexei Rykov still believed he could serve the revolution. He still trusted that logic, that reason might stop Stalin's madness. But reason no longer lived inside the Kremlin. By 1930, Stalin's economic war had begun. Collectivization. Private farms were seized. Millions of peasants, branded as kulaks, were deported, starved, or shot. Rykov saw the disaster coming. He had spent his life building industry, understanding the numbers, and now he watched them collapse. Factories without fuel, fields without grain, a nation dying for ideology. He wasn't alone. Two other veterans of the revolution stood with him, Nikolai Bukharin and Mikhail Tomsky. Together, they formed what history would call the right opposition. They argued that Stalin's policies were destroying socialism itself. They called for slower reforms, for protecting the peasantry, for an end to mass arrests. According to historian Isaac Deutscher, their opposition was moral, not military. They had no army, no weapons, just words. And in Stalin's world, words were enough to kill. In meeting after meeting, Stalin accused Rykov and Bukharin of right deviation. He called them traitors to the proletariat. Every speech chipped away at their reputations, their allies, their safety. By 1934, the party was united, in fear. No one defended Rykov anymore. No one dared. He was removed from the Central Committee. His letters to Stalin went unanswered. His colleagues stopped returning his greetings in the hallways. Rykov's last friend, Mikhail Tomsky, understood what was coming. When the NKVD arrived for him in 1936, he didn't wait to be taken. He shot himself in his study. Rykov knew that silence would soon come for him too, but still, he stayed in Moscow. He didn't flee, didn't hide, didn't fight. He believed, somehow, that the revolution would remember who he was. He was wrong. The last voice of reason in Stalin's circle was now waiting for the knock on the door. February 1938, Moscow, the final act of the Great Purge. Before the world, Stalin was ready to prove that his enemies were everywhere, even among those who built the revolution itself. The defendants sat in a row: Bukharin, Rykov, Yagoda, and 18 others, once giants of the Soviet state. Now, pale shadows under the harsh light of Stalin's court. The charges? Sabotage, espionage, conspiracy with Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. It was absurd. Even the prosecutors knew it. But this was not a trial for truth. It was theater for fear. According to historian Robert Conquest, these trials were rituals of destruction. Every confession was rehearsed, every accusation scripted. The only real audience was Stalin. When Rykov stood, he was no longer the man who once led the Soviet Union. His voice shook, his eyes empty. He confessed to crimes he never committed. To being a traitor, to plotting against the revolution he had devoted his life to. It wasn't courage or weakness. It was exhaustion. A man beaten until truth and lie became the same thing. Then came the sentence. Death by shooting. No appeal, no delay. That night, Rykov and the others were taken from their cells in Lubyanka prison. There were no last words, no final letters, just a single sound, a gunshot in a concrete basement. And just like that, one of Lenin's closest comrades, the man who once held the future of the Soviet Union in his hands, was erased. No grave, no marker, no remembrance. In Stalin's world, friendship ended with a signature, and loyalty ended with a bullet. Rykov's death wasn't just the end of a man. It was the end of an idea. The idea that anyone, no matter how loyal, could survive Stalin's revolution. By the time the echoes of those gunshots faded, Stalin stood alone. The revolution that once had many voices now spoke only with his. Alexei Rykov, once Lenin's successor, now another name on a list written not in ink, but in blood. He believed in the revolution. He believed in loyalty, in reason, in comradeship. But under Stalin, those words meant nothing. They were only masks, hollow, fragile, temporary. Every ally became a suspect. Every conversation became evidence. Every silence became a crime. By 1938, the Soviet Union was a graveyard of its own founders. Zinoviev, Kamenev, Bukharin, Rykov, all executed, all once celebrated as the fathers of socialism. And Stalin? He stood above them all, untouched. Their deaths were his message to the world. In this empire, only one voice speaks. According to historian Stephen Kotkin, these purges weren't madness. They were strategy, a way to rebuild absolute power through terror and silence. And it worked. The same revolution that promised freedom became the machinery of fear. A system where truth was rewritten and memory itself became a weapon. Alexei Rykov died believing he could still reason with the revolution. He never realized the revolution he served had already been buried. Only Stalin remained. This was not the death of a man. It was the death of a dream. And from its ashes rose the shadow that would rule the Soviet Union for decades.